Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's BAInsights session. And today, I'm pleased to be talking about gap analysis. Once again, some really good guests with us to talk about the topic. So, if I can start with one such guest, Pip, over to you, please, to introduce yourself, if you would, please.
Hiya, I'm Pip Hall. I'm a business analyst. I work for Telent Technology Services. I won Businessanalysis. Can't say it. Can't even say it. I won Business Analyst of the Year last year, and I've been doing some really good work with my organisation who are not experienced of working with business analysts, so don't really know what to expect of us, don't really know what we do. So I'm really pleased to bring that to them as an organisation and to bring my skills into their profession.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Pip. And Iurii, over to you, please.
Thank you, John. Hello, everybody. It's Iurii, not Luri, as many people actually say. I'm a business analyst. I've been in this role for 11 years. Currently, I am a BA manager, and I'm working on excelling business analysis competencies in NIX. It's a Ukrainian global IT outsourcing company. During my work, that's what I do. Out of work, I also have a blog. It's Passionate BA. You may have heard of me. I do a lot of articles, digests, whatsoever. And this year, I will be speaking on European Business Analysis Day on 16th of May, and another conference which yet to be announced.
Excellent, thank you, Iurii. And we'll be sure to sort of share any links to those conferences or bodies that both of you want to share. And I'm sure there might be one or two that might come up during the conversation as well, as it tends to happen. All right, but thank you again both for your introduction. I'm going to start off, if we can, with really the question of what is gap analysis, and I'd like to start with Pip, if I may, on that particular question.
Of course. So gap analysis is one of my most favoured, most used tools. It essentially looks at where you are right now as part of an organisation or a part of a piece of work, and requires you to look at where you want to go, however you wish to articulate that. It could be an organisation operating model, it could be a process, it could be anything. And the gap analysis compares the two so that you can see what work you need to do in which areas in order to move from where you are to where you wish to be.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pip. And Iurii, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I suppose that lately I've become a little bit academic, as I've done my CBAP from IIBA. So from me, I would be saying that gap analysis is the difference between the current state and the future state. So basically, you define where you are at the moment, where you want to go, and to define the change strategy, you need to know the steps you need to go through to get to your future state. So that's probably my definition of gap analysis.
Excellent, thank you, Iurii. Thank you both. And I think really all I'd add to that, I certainly won't repeat what you said there, because obviously it is very 100% accurate. I think maybe the only thing I might add is to say that that could be applied to a variety of things. It could be process, it could be organisation structure. We tend to think about things as well from like a systems or application, or tends to be capability perspective actually as BAs, rather than necessarily looking at the systems themselves, but quite often looking at the functionalities of a particular environment or the capabilities of a system or systems. But certainly all that stuff that we've already said around understanding the current state and where you want to be, and then how to move either in one jump or several stages is very much what we would also consider as gap analysis.
If I might add to that,
yeah, sure,
I've been running through BAIBOK recently, preparing to our meeting, and I found out interesting thing that BAIBOK states a gap analysis only for IT perspective for business analysis. So you are completely true, and I agree with you that it's relevant to business architecture, to process improvements, all that kind of stuff. But for some reason, BAIBOK states gap analysis as an activity for BA only for IT perspective. I'm not sure. Maybe you have an idea for that. Why is that?
It's interesting because it's quite easy to forget that we can apply it in different ways into different topics. Because I think process is the most obvious to me that it can be applied. It's probably the area where I might apply gap analysis the most. But you know, there is of course lots of times, well, there are lots of times when I'm looking at how different organisations do a variety of things. You know, how they might deliver their training, as an example, or how they might manage adoptions of new technology or new processes, and that in itself is very much always something that can be improved, and therefore you could be applying gap analysis to that as well. And hopefully sessions like this are a nice reminder of that to people.
And in the BCS world, you know, there's the gap analysis when we're learning about gap analysis, Poppit and other such tools are in the middle, so that regardless of the arena in which you're looking at gap analysis, you're encouraged then to look at people, organisation, processes, information and technology, because they all play a part in a change from one state to another state, don't they?
That's it. And I think, I mean, for me as well, a nice starting point to then drive further, more detailed analysis. I think in order to do that gap analysis, or even to understand the current state or indeed the target state, you know, it's natural to move on and understand more detail about, you know, if it's the process, as an example, you know, what is happening today, what are some of the issues and the opportunities that potentially are there, and actually use those to inform what your target state design might be. You know, so it very much encourages that more detailed view for me of what both the current and the target state are.
Yeah, and also one thing I really like about gap analysis is that you can do it all sorts of different levels. You can do it from a whole, you know, you can do it from a big scale, or actually you can sort of nest gap analyses. So you do it on the big level, and then you apply it to each of the different sort of sectors and say, actually, I don't understand this enough. So not only do I need to define that area in more detail, but I need to do a proper gap analysis at that finer detail to understand what those different, you know, those different elements of change are.
So yeah, and perhaps, I mean, it's a perfect point, Pip, because it sort of allows us to realise that it's a lot more available as a technique, because we can apply it at a number of different levels. You know, we don't have to wait to that all-encompassing end-to-end project where we get to look at everything. We can apply it just to a small piece of capability within a system that we're working on, perhaps.
I think a lot of us do it naturally, but we don't realise that it's got a name or technique name associated with it. We do it all the time at home as well, don't we? You know, I want to buy this. I currently have this amount of money and I need that amount of money, and therefore the difference is I need to save £1 a week, you know, for 52 weeks. You know, it's something that comes very, very naturally to us. But I think a lot of the time the challenge is in documenting it and making it into something tangible. The so what of doing that gap analysis. What do we do with that analysis and with that gap once we've defined what it is?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the reason I love gap analysis, because you're right. Even when you're preparing a dinner, like you're hungry, right? That's your current state. And you want to be not hungry. That's your future state. You need to do something. You need some scope of work to become not hungry. That's your gap between hungry and not hungry.
It makes that the way you explained it, Barry, as well, makes it a lot easier to appreciate how it could be applied to all the situations that we might come across as BAs. It's quite often for me, it's helpful when you learn about a topic for the first time to think of it in more real life terminology, and then it's often easier to apply. That's for sure. I wonder, Iurii, if I can start with you on this one, in terms of what are the benefits actually of doing gap analysis? I mean, we might have mentioned a few of them, but are there any additional points that you might want to share?
Oh, I think that gap analysis is not just something that benefits you, it's a must-do thing, actually. You just won't get to your goal if you don't understand the steps, right? So to get to your goal, you need to define a change strategy. And gap analysis is an essential part of the change strategy. Basically, you need to know what to do. You need to know what to change in your life, in your project, in your initiative, in your business to get from point A to point B. Unless you identify that, you probably will be working on very different, very inappropriate things.
And Pip, do you have anything you'd like to add on that, on the benefits of gap analysis?
Yeah, my central focus, I think, particularly for gap analysis, is I find it a really useful tool to explain to stakeholders what a project is about. It's really, you can relate to things, that you can deliver it, your gap, you can explain to people in a very easy way, and you can alter the way that you explain it, or the terminology that you use, or the methods that you use to explain that gap. It is very easily transferable to different stakeholders, and therefore makes it relatable to them. I think a lot of people, because it's so natural, once if you explain it in terms of saving up to go on holiday, or I'm going from hungry to not hungry, it makes it a very relatable tool for people. People can understand the concept of gap analysis, even if they're not BAs or don't use it professionally. So actually, in terms of stakeholder engagement, you can say you can personalize it. So you're talking to a user, you're currently doing it like this, and you want to be able to do it like that. And so what we're looking at, the project is looking from taking you from doing it like this to doing it like that. And that story, that analysis can be personalized to every audience, to every stakeholder that we speak to.
And on top of that, the understanding of gap allows enterprise to know whether they have capabilities needed to reach their future state. It's like a match or mismatch of your capabilities and your goal.
Yeah. I think it's a nice way to reflect on what the target state, what you want it to be. So rather than necessarily getting into the detail straight away of what that needs to look like, what are the drivers behind that target state? Because before you can start doing your target state design, it's about thinking, well, how are we going to evolve the current state? Is it to make things more efficient? Is it to speed things up? Is it to improve transparency, or to make it customer experience better? Or is it all those things and more? And you can use those drivers to inform what your target state is going to be.
I also think that when you start speaking to somebody about that gap, they start engaging with what that vision is. And so one of the great benefits is that you get stakeholders engaged in that vision, which is obviously really important in order to make that change. And so sometimes it can be hard to motivate the stakeholders to come on the journey with us. If you spend that time talking about that gap analysis and what it could look like and feel like and sound like to them, then they are encouraged to start describing what that vision is for them, which helps us do what we do and helps us identify what that gap is. But also then they get an awareness of the work that needs to happen, certainly from their point of view, in order to make that, to articulate what that gap is, and therefore appreciate the work that needs to be done to close it.
That's right. And those gaps are not always filled by technology changes. I think from thinking that way, it can help people think, actually, there are maybe some other changes we can put in place that don't.
And things that I need to do as a stakeholder, actually, which are often the things that people find hard to engage stakeholders with, is actually my behavior as a stakeholder needs to change, or my, the activity that I do as a stakeholder impacts that broader vision, but I can't articulate what that is until I look at my gap analysis that's personal to me, and then I can see what that difference is, and then I can comment on it, and I can be involved in the process then.
That's it. Yeah. And perhaps having that personal view as well, when you speak to your first stakeholder, can provide some insight for the next stakeholders that you speak to subsequently, to gives them a yardstick in which to measure. So not necessarily, hopefully not to repeat it, but to at least think of another example which they can start to consider and that applies to them.
Yeah.
And actually, I suppose we'll be getting to that later, but Pip, you actually brought a great point about personal gap analysis for the stakeholder. From what I learned working with various clients, that probably not solution is the most important part of limitation, but culture, like internal culture of people, the corporate culture. That's what preventing people from moving from point A to point B, right? That's probably the most, it's the biggest limitation or problem with gap analysis.
I guess by at least calling that out and making it visible, you're in that situation, the stakeholders, the team can come together and actually figure out ways to remove those issues that are causing that to be a situation.
Exactly, their internal readiness for the change. That's probably what gap analysis shows, like from the first moment.
Yeah, because another of those really useful BA techniques where, you know, just by going through the process of starting to visualize the situation and how that situation evolves and what you've learned, it just then becomes an opportunity for stakeholders to, you know, take some of that shorter term action to help you as well, and for the collective to come together and work on what will ultimately be the transition to the target state, hopefully. I wondered, I mean, are there any tools or frameworks or approaches that you've happened to use when it comes to gap analysis? And I wonder, Iurii, can I start with you on that one?
Well, it depends on the initiative and the scope of change. Because when you are talking about the IT business analysis, in which I work most of the time, you start probably with a business idea, with the understanding what needed to be done, and then if your client knows what are their competitors and what they want to achieve and how they would love to enter to the market to be distinctive from their competitors, that's a good thing, but that's not always the case. So probably the first thing business analysts do is a benchmark. It's something when you like compare your competitors, see what they do, what are the best practices, that kind of stuff. If we're talking more about like business level questions, something like that, probably PESTLE analysis would be one of the tools to understand how the external works and how this specific business works in this context and what's missing. So probably these two are the most common tools.
And just to confirm, Iurii, you're referring to the PESTLE analysis.
Oh yeah, PESTLE, thank you.
I'm glad you mentioned it, and under a slightly different way as well. I mean, it's always nice to call out PESTLE analysis as its full name as well, PESTLE. For those that, yeah, I'm not sure I would necessarily want to go through all, but having that perspective on political and economic and social and technological and legal and environmental. There we go. Got all of them in there. Good, without even referring to my notes. But and having that PESTLE analysis as well can just mean that you're focusing on the situation from a number of directions rather than just solely thinking about it from a technology perspective or solely from the people and culture perspective as well. Yeah, so I'm glad you called that one out there, Iurii. Okay, and Pip, anything from you in terms of approaches or techniques or models or frameworks?
So to the other end of what Iurii was saying, so Iurii's called out some of the big picture tools. My instant reaction was to go to things like Pop-it, like we mentioned earlier, to the business model canvas, and to a value proposition. So when we're now looking specifically at the services or the products that an organization you know, provides, and how they set themselves up in order to do that, you know, when you're introducing a new service or a new product, to look at the impact that has, or if you're, you know, on your organization structure, for example, or any other elements of the business model canvas. Or doing a piece of work at the moment with my organization, moving mindsets towards services and service design, aside from sort of sequenced processes, if you like, that end up with an output, is looking at what's the gap between what we currently do and what we want our customers to feel like. So, you know, what is that value proposition that we want to be able to offer, and what is it that we currently offer? So do it the other way around. Yeah. And then say, actually, what are the differences there that we need to achieve? So like I said, I use it all over. I use it in so many different ways, but sometimes you can get down to that granular detail. So what is it? What is the reputation that we want to have? What is it? What is the relationship with our customers that we want to have? And describe that, and then do that research and that analysis that says, actually, what is the relationship we have with our customers now? What do they think about us? And then plan that bit in the middle, understand what that gap is and what we need to do to be able to fill that gap. Is very different from saying, I want to introduce another product and I need this level of, you know, I need to increase the capacity in this capability and that kind of thing. You know, it's I've used it, yeah. My mind is blank right now, but lots and lots of different models. You can very often use the same model to describe a target state as you can a current state.
Thinking about the customer as well is a really nice angle to think about it from, because you know it gives you some very tangible things to be aiming for. That's not just too inward thinking. You're actually thinking about how's this going to impact our own customers as well.
Yeah, and internal customers as well. So we do a lot of work. We are a customer-facing business unit within our organisation, and we rely a lot on our support services, obviously, for finance and HR and, you know, health and safety and all those other things. So it forces you to also look at your internal customers, or we are internal customers of those support services, but you can do that gap analysis on that level as well as the customers that are outside of your organisation.
Yeah. I was just wondering here, Pip, whether you use the BAInsights scorecard for this like analysis you do, because it feels like your analysis might benefit from it. It's another great technique, right, to define the whole chain from your internal business processes to financial to customer satisfaction, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So at the moment, so that's where I plan to go with the current piece of work I'm doing. At the moment, we're still grappling, if you like, with understanding the extra we want to. We pride ourselves on customer service, and so I've challenged my colleagues to say, how does customer service manifest itself? What is excellence as far as our customers is concerned, and how do we know that that's what our customers think versus what we think our customers think, which is the journey that we're on at the moment. But yeah, you're right, Iurii. My plan is to take them round the whole scorecard, you know, so that we can look at it from all the different perspectives, so that we do cover innovation, we do cover our supply chain, we do cover, you know, the market forces, and then out to things like PESTLE to see not just, you know, 1 year ahead of us, but 5, 8, 15 years ahead of us as well. And I think that's another benefit of gap analysis, is it's not restricted. Your gap can be 1 day or 1 week or 1 month. You know, it's not only the change that can be stepped, but the vision can be stepped, so that you can not only do gap analysis from a strategic level down to the minutiae, but you can do it over different periods of time as well.
Yeah, yes, and
True.
that difference of both longer term thinking and short term thinking means there isn't just the pressure to try and ring fence every idea and every transition to something that has to be completed by the project or the change, but it can be aimed at more aspirational as well.
Yeah.
I think to add to excellent points you both made, I think probably in terms of useful frameworks I sometimes use. I mean, most recently I've been using more capability models and thinking that when we get beyond the target state process, and we're more thinking, well, what capabilities do we need to support that process? It's then quite useful to understand, well, okay, which of those capabilities do we have at the moment? And then the natural extension for that is then, well, what applications are we using for our current capabilities? Which of our applications could we use for some of those additional capabilities that we've identified? Or is there a need to either build or procure or introduce new technologies or new applications for those true gaps where we just don't have any capability that we're looking to introduce as well? And I found that quite a nice way to connect your story with the process focus on the story as well.
Yeah, we are just embarking on that journey ourselves, this next part of the journey. So across Telent, not just my business unit. I've started in my business unit, but that's kind of grown in visibility, if you like, in the organisation. And that's exactly, you know, we started maybe towards the end of last year looking at that with some real rigour, you know, where we've got several systems in use across the organisation that are achieving the same outcome. You know, there's efficiencies to be made there, but there's also gaps where we're using tools that aren't fit for that purpose to do jobs that they're not designed to do. and looking at that whole landscape. That hadn't occurred to me actually, but yeah, that's still using that gap analysis, isn't it?
That's it. I'm thinking in your situation around the capabilities means that you're not too wedded to systems at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Way of, as you said, is there any tools that are, are there multiple tools that people seem to be using that are fundamentally doing the same thing?
Yeah.
Which is quite often something to be looked at anyway, not always something I need to remove, but it's typically a good candidate to consider anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I wonder, I mean, in terms of outcomes of gap analysis, I'd be interested in, Pip, I can start with yourself in terms of understanding, those, once you've done your gap analysis, how would you tend to present your outcomes, or in which form would the outcomes of that gap analysis, what would it look like, I guess?
Well, as all true business analysts would say, it depends. Does depend on your audience, and it does, for me, it depends on what I want to achieve by documenting, however that looks like, documenting my gap analysis. So I spoke earlier about my different stakeholders. So I will document it in different ways for different stakeholders. And that is entirely driven by how a stakeholder engages with me. So if they, sometimes I'll do a written report with the different categories, and those categories will be determined by the different models that I've used to think about it. Quite often the business model canvas, quite often Pop-it, because they are, and they're really good, solid categories. There's also, I don't remember model names very well, but the one that says who, what, why, where, when, and how, I very often use that because, again, it's relatable to people. People understand what you're talking to. What is the gap? Who is the gap aimed at? So those three are largely the way I would present now, or the categories that I would present. Now, how I present it, like I said, is determined by the stakeholder. So some people I might verbally present to, depending on how involved they are in the project or not. Depends how much detail they want. What are they wanting my output for? So if my boss wants an update on where I am, I'll sit like this and I'll say, right, this is where I am, la, 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 and tell him where I'm at. If we need some kind of board buy-in, up to the C-suite of people, then it'll be a set of slides, but they're always, you can always link them, so it doesn't matter how I present or how that information is presented, you can always see a link between the different levels of detail. As a general rule, in my head, there is a matrix of, as Iurii was saying, you've got these different stages, and then of the change strategy, and then I've got my different lenses by the Pop-it, BMC, whatever, and so I can hone in at any point depending on what that stakeholder wants. At this stage, what am I expected to do with my processes? And I can get my Rubik's Cube into that cell. But I don't often present it comprehensively in one place. To do that, I will present it as different views in order for it to be accessible to whichever audience I'm trying to engage with. I think that was a bit of an answer and a non-answer at the same time, wasn't it? It's not very.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, it's good demonstration of the fact that we're not just presenting the outcome to one person. And actually, there's a number of people, whether they're familiar or unfamiliar with the technique, or they're unfamiliar with the scenario in which you're operating. They will require different levels of detail delivered in different ways. I think that was an excellent point there made. But it's clear that there isn't just a single output. There's typically a consistent theme of the output, perhaps, but to those that are like there's the higher ups, the steering committees of the world, they might look at things at a very fairly high level, whereas there might be teams who need to look at things at a very granular level. But there will be that lineage between all levels of detail, which will tie back to your analysis in the first place of what was the current state and to the target state.
And I think with gap analysis, there isn't a recognised presentational format, is there? So you can go to other things like the business model canvas, and there is a grid. We could draw it now. it's got, you know, suppliers on the right hand side, you know, all that kind of stuff. You can see it, can't you? And so actually it's very easy, it's very straightforward to have a sheet of paper or an electronic template, and as you work out what you're doing and work out what your current state is and what your future state is, you can complete that template, and anybody could pick that up and say, actually, I recognize this as a business model canvas and I can see the difference between here and here. Gap analysis, in my opinion, isn't like that. It's very much a thinking tool. And so you have to rely on other tools to give you those categories, and then for your own experience and your own instinct to tell you what those categories are and how you articulate then what that content is.
And Iurii, do you like to add something?
Yeah. Suppose I have something to add, please. I'll be talking more about the IT business analysis, but I suppose the same would be applicable to other perspectives. So in IT business analysis, in outsourcing at least, the context is the following: if there is a client, the client needs to solve their business need. To do that, they define that they need an IT solution of some kind, and they go to outsourcing company and say, hey, we have this problem, we need this solution. And what BA starts with identifying the business idea, which sometimes wrong, and not what they actually specified in the first place. And then they expect to get a scope of work, like an estimation for what needs to be done. And there are a few forms in which BAs do that, at least in Ukrainian IT. Probably there are other forms in other countries, in other IT branches. So the high-level application is a business case or a vision and scope document, as Carl Wiggers proposed it many years ago. It still works. So you state your current state, your business idea, you state your future state, you define a few things which need to be implemented or done or researched to get to the goal, and a few risks which are important to consider. That's high-level application. On a more low-level application, that's probably a features list. It's a metrics type model of requirements where it came from feature-driven development, actually, from that methodology. It's, as it says, a list of features and their estimates. Like you apply functional decomposition to that to see which feature is bound to which feature, that kind of stuff. Plus you add a few things like testing, all that kind of services, design, and then you get a quote. And the quote is the result of the gap analysis between what you have and what you want to achieve. And that would be a scope of work to implement. That's in a project kind of thing. But getting to the previous point about not the application, but the applications, not the outcomes, but applications. Actually, I'm currently working, and we had a discussion last year with you, John, on competency matrix. And in this case, my current state was a list of functions business analysts do currently in our company. The future state is a list of criteria which business analysts need to satisfy to have certain level of seniority. And the result of gap analysis is a list of topics and knowledge and techniques they need to know and apply to get that seniority level. So that's also an application of gap analysis, and the outcome is a huge matrix with many rows and columns depicting different skills, knowledge, etc.
So, yeah, and it's, I mean, as you said, another good example of a gap analysis. I mean, we've been working on some maturity assessments ourselves recently, and yeah, I'm not sure any of us spoke about gap analysis when we were doing it, but it's very much focusing on how different individuals in this case can increase their maturity in different areas of business analysis, which of course does actually state what the current state is, or their current gap or current level, and their next level, and then how they transition to it. Interestingly, without using the word gap analysis. So
yeah, that's proper light bulb gone off there, Iurii.
That's it.
Welcome.
I think, I mean, in terms of, I guess, only things I might add in terms of outcomes there as well. I mean, you mentioned like features. We might typically, the outcome for me might be propositions or proposals. It might be epics that reflect those proposals in some cases, or indeed a set of requirements that, at various levels that might be acted upon as well. I think sometimes we also think about the measures and how to measure the gaps, and therefore how to measure the benefits that might come along from it. So for example, I think perhaps the example you mentioned earlier on, when you was thinking about that your end customer, potentially in those situations, the customer's interaction can be measured through like I don't know, like ratings or complaints or extra products that they buy, or customers that come back more often, and potentially thinking about some of those metrics to apply to some of the gap analysis might be a good way to measure actually that we've achieved where we want to be, as opposed to remaining where we are at a great cost and time, as hopefully has been.
Things like when you measure the steps in processes, and put your internal SLAs on, or your indicators, your 3 days to reply to an email, and whatever. That's all good stuff, isn't it, to show that actually you can measure a change and the direction of that change.
I wonder, well, I mean, I think it's probably possibly almost the last question, right? It's fair, it could be a big one. And you touched on it interestingly right at the start, Pip. I think you mentioned maybe one challenge, but I'd like to know if there were any specific challenges you might want to share, and importantly, how you might overcome those challenges as well in relation to gap analysis.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest challenge, I was going to give you a really stupid answer then. The biggest challenge is to define your future state and your current state. Obviously it is, because actually, unless you are sure that you have complete knowledge about your current state and your future state, then the quality of your gap analysis will be compromised. So it is a stupid answer, but it's also not. My bigger challenge is in the future state and in getting people to engage in that vision. So particularly where that vision, I don't know if there's a reluctance or if there is a genuine difficulty in describing that future state, whatever that future state might be. People don't know, and you get a future state that's a description that's very functional, which is good, but it's not very inspirational and doesn't allow for creativity in designing or developing any kind of solutions. So I find my biggest challenge is getting people to engage in that conversation about what that future state is, beyond the obvious, I'm going to release this product, what do I need to do? Because there are so many questions behind, I want to release this product, what do I do? That I'm quite often, I think I'm considered quite often as one of those little toddlers. Why, what about this, and how about that, and why did you say that, and who else do I talk to? But until you know the answers to those questions, or at least get them thinking about those questions, you can't do justice with a gap analysis. I also think that gap analysis, for that very reason, can be considered quite a simple technique. And I think it's far simpler in its theory than it is in its execution. Because to do a meaningful gap analysis requires a lot of thought and a lot of provocation and a lot of discussion. It's not as simple as saying, well, you've got current state is 2 people, future state is 10 people, so we need to recruit 8 people. It's yes, that's factually correct, but it's all the understanding that goes behind that as to where those people will sit, what they will do, what skills they need to have, what process will they follow, what systems do they use, that makes a gap analysis worthwhile. I think sometimes because in theory it's very simple, it can be dumbed down when actually it's a very powerful tool.
And I guess what you touch on there as well, I mean, it really demonstrates that as a BA, you're able to use a variety of skills and the creative side as well for most people to be able to help those stakeholders understand what their target state could be, you know, what they require from it, and asking questions that are not just driven by their current experiences, but also, you know, asking them to think more expansively. And well, if systems weren't a constraint, what would you like to be doing? How would you like to be experiencing? What would your customers like to see? And then, you know, helping them on that journey, as it were, to articulate all of their views, you know, and some of them also can't do everything about, we can't solve all of them, but at least if they can express what they're looking for beyond maybe some system constraints, it gives us the ability to think more, to deliver something a bit more expansive as well.
And I'm a big believer in future states at least being spoken about in terms of outcomes rather than outputs. So I know you've got an issue with this, and I know that, you know, it takes too many keystrokes, and I know that the screen is too small and it takes too long to load up. But what do you want to achieve by using a system at all? Because it might be, you know, that at the end of the day, that using a system isn't the best way. Maybe a carrier pigeon would be far more effective to achieve the outcome that you want to achieve. But unless we understand what that is, then we're unable to come up with those innovations that not always provide the solution, but provide the inspiration for the solution. And that's, I think, is a very important part of that process as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, certainly for me, I found the biggest challenge, it relates very much to what you were saying in terms of, you know, just not just having stakeholders thinking just about the systems and what they want to have and the system. They feel like they've already decided what it's going to be.
Yes.
Try and take a step back and think, well, actually, not the systems. Think more about your process and your capability and your experience and what you've seen, even in other places you've worked at. You know, what would you really like it to be? How do you want to operate and interact with individuals as well throughout the process?
How do you want to feel when you're working?
Yeah.
You know, that drives a lot of perplexed faces at me. Like, how do you want me to feel when I'm working? You know, what kind of a question is that? But, you know, do you want to feel really frustrated and constrained by a box, or do you want to be able to work anywhere? And, you know, it takes a lot, though, for people to break out of those rigid things that they do all day to be able to engage with it.
That's it. And it's a really interesting point. It's all about, like, you know, how do you want to feel? Because I think it's quite natural for people to share how frustrated they are with situations or current capability, but it's maybe less natural to share how you'd like to feel about the future functionality or future capability. And it's really a really good point that you made, because hopefully it may encourage people to think about aspects that you hadn't even thought about, or I wouldn't have naturally thought about in the conventional way.
Yeah.
And Iurii, if I could ask you a similar question in terms of just that same question, really, in terms of challenges.
I think that a nightmare situation for a person doing strategy analysis is when no one has time to define the current state. There are very blurry future state descriptions, like very blurry goals, and no one has time to find out, are there any risks to go through this change? And the change strategy isn't clear. Let's just do that, right? But every step of it, every piece of it is a nightmare when you don't have a stakeholders on board to spend time to thoroughly go through each and every of these points. But probably the biggest challenge I've ever faced is every time when you had all this analysis and you made a gap analysis and you have a scope of work, either it's too much or not everyone is ready for the change, right? Because to change, you need to do something. It's like that joke. Who wants a change? Me. Who wants to change? Oops, not me. It's like this.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I like the way you nicely introduced time as well, Iurii, as we're about out of it as well. But I think what a nice place to end as well. But so probably to properly end, just want to thank you both for your time and your insight. And you've certainly made gap analysis a lot more interesting topic, perhaps, than it might seem on the surface. And to the point you made earlier on, that it isn't just that simple mechanical technique. You know, there's a lot that we can gain from it, and hopefully, as I've done, you know, in this session, those that watch it might also gain as well, and get some opinions of how else they can use and develop their gap analysis. So thank you on behalf of them.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you.